The Sea of Galilee was no stranger to storms, but this one was different. It came without warning, with a fury that seemed to rise from the deep itself. Waves towered like walls of water, slamming into the wooden boat with relentless force. The sky churned with blackened clouds, and thunder cracked overhead like the voice of judgment. Rain poured in sheets, soaking the disciples as they bailed water with trembling hands, panic etched on every face. In the chaos, Jesus lay sleeping in the stern, head resting on a cushion, untouched by the storm's wrath. The contrast was shocking. While his followers cried out in fear, he slept in peace. Finally, they shook him awake, voices raised over the roar of the wind. "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" Jesus stood, his robe whipped by the wind, eyes calm in the face of terror. He looked out over the sea, not with fear, but with authority. Raising his hand, he rebuked the wind and spoke to the waves, "Peace, be still." In an instant, the sea obeyed. The howling wind stopped. The waves sank into ripples. The rain faded into silence. The clouds peeled away, revealing a sky brushed with gold as dawn broke on the horizon. The disciples stood frozen, drenched and breathless. "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" they whispered among themselves. But Jesus' gaze was fixed not on them, nor the now still waters, but on the distant shore ahead. The region of the Gerasenes lay cloaked in mist, silent and waiting. He knew what they did not. This storm had been more than nature's fury. Something dark awaited across the sea. A soul tormented beyond reason. A spiritual stronghold untouched by mercy for years. And now, the confrontation had been set in motion, not by accident, but by divine intent. The sea had tried to stop him, but it had failed. Now the real storm was about to begin, not of water, but of war between light and darkness. In the shadow of jagged cliffs, where the dead were laid in hollowed-out tombs, a figure wandered alone. His feet were bare, torn from stones. His body, thin and bruised, was covered in self-inflicted wounds, some old, some fresh. His hair was matted, his face hollow, his eyes wild with a pain no human language could describe. He had long ceased to speak in words, his voice had become a weapon of torment, a constant scream that echoed through the valley. This was no ordinary man. He had been someone's son once. Perhaps a brother. A friend. But now, he was a shell, a vessel of torment occupied by forces unseen. The people of the nearby town had long since given up trying to help him. They had tried everything, ropes, then chains, then exile. He had broken through them all. Not by willpower, but by strength not his own. Strength that came from what lived inside him. No one dared come near anymore. Children were warned to stay away. Travelers walked the long way around the cliffs. Even the shepherds kept their flocks far from the tombs. They said he was possessed. Mad. Beyond hope. And yet, he was also forgotten, a soul no longer counted among the living, though he still breathed. By night, his howls disturbed the peace. By day, he cut himself with sharp rocks, trying to silence the voices. The tombs, the mountains, the sea, none could bring rest. His torment was relentless, a storm without end. And then, something shifted. Far off, through his haze of madness, he sensed a presence. Not like the others who came with fear or stones. This presence was different. It didn't shrink from his cries. It didn't tremble at the spirits within him. It was calm. Steady. Holy. The man stood upright for the first time in days. His breathing hitched. The demons inside him stirred. Something, or someone, was crossing the water. And though they trembled, he began to run. Not away, but toward hope. Toward confrontation. Toward deliverance. The man among the tombs was no longer alone. The memory played like a nightmare burned into the minds of those who had witnessed it. The first time they chained him, there had still been hope. A few strong men approached him cautiously, speaking softly, trying to reach the person buried beneath the madness. He didn't scream then. He watched with hollow eyes. He let them bind his wrists with rope. They thought the calm was cooperation, but it was only the eye of the storm. When they tightened the final knot, his body convulsed with fury. From his throat erupted a roar that no human should be able to produce. He threw himself against the restraints, muscles bulging, veins standing out like cords. The rope snapped like string. They brought heavier bindings. Metal this time. Shackles on his ankles, cuffs around his wrists, chains bolted into iron stakes driven into the rock. He lay still for a moment, panting. Then he laughed, an unholy sound, layered with voices not his own. The villagers stepped back. And then he rose. With eyes rolled back and jaw clenched, he pulled. Once. Twice. On the third pull, the chains burst apart like dry twigs. Men ran. Women screamed. The hillside echoed with the clash of broken metal and the shrieks of the tormented. They never tried again. From that day forward, they left him to the tombs, deciding it was better for one man to suffer alone than for the town to be haunted by him. He became a ghost in the land of the living, a warning, a legend told to children. And yet, even as he roamed the cliffs, the chains, now rusted, still hung on the rocks. A monument to failed efforts. A reminder of the strength that wasn't his. But deep inside, beneath the rage and the legion of voices, a whisper remained. The last memory of a sane thought, buried but not gone, is there anyone strong enough to break these chains? Not the ones they made, but the ones inside me. He had broken chains of metal. But he had never been able to break the ones in his soul. That was about to change. The sky was bleeding orange and crimson as the sun dipped behind the hills of Gadara. Winds blew across the rocky cliffs, rustling the dry shrubs and scraping across the jagged tombstones that dotted the hillside. Amid the eerie quiet, one sound shattered the silence, a scream. A human scream, but one so tormented, so raw, it could hardly be called human anymore. The man stood silhouetted against the horizon, bare-chested, his hair wild and matted, his body scarred with wounds both old and new. His fists clenched. His eyes wide, he raised his head to the heavens and released a cry so deep and guttural it echoed across the mountains like a war cry of a soul being torn in two. It wasn't just pain, it was a sound filled with rage, confusion, and endless torment. He screamed because no one else could hear what he heard, the voices. Thousands of them. Whispering. Screaming. Mocking. Threatening. A cacophony of spiritual chaos that never slept, never rested, and never let him be. There was no quiet in his mind, no peace in his body. Only torment. Only madness. Sometimes, he would throw himself against the rocks until blood ran down his legs. Other times, he'd tear at his own skin, desperate to claw the evil out. But nothing helped. No medicine. No priest. No chains. Nothing and no one could contain or comfort him. The people had long given up. They avoided the tombs. They spoke his name in hushed tones, as if afraid it might summon him. He had become a ghost in his own land, alive, but buried among the dead. The cliffside was now his home. The graveyard, his sanctuary. His screams, his only prayer. But that evening, as his cries echoed across the hills, something was different. The winds changed direction. The sea had calmed. And across the water, a boat was approaching. Something, or someone, was coming. And the darkness inside him felt it. It stirred. And it feared. The sea was calm now. Almost unnaturally so. The waves that once raged with fury lay still, like a beast subdued by a whisper. The air carried a chill, not of weather, but of something unseen, something spiritual. It was as if nature itself held its breath. A small wooden boat scraped the shoreline. The water lapped gently at its sides, making barely a sound. Jesus stepped onto the rocky ground with slow, deliberate steps. Behind him, the disciples climbed out cautiously, still shaken from the storm that had nearly taken their lives. But Jesus? He looked ahead, as if he knew something was waiting. The cliffs of Gadara loomed before them, harsh, jagged, and lifeless. A burial site carved into the stone. And somewhere among those tombs, something stirred. There were no crowds waiting to greet Jesus here. No applause. No one seeking healing or asking questions. This was enemy territory. A land defiled by unclean spirits and avoided by all who valued their sanity. But Jesus didn't flinch. He came not to be welcomed, but to confront. Far above, hidden in the shadows of a broken cave, a figure crouched. Watching, sniffing the air like a hunted animal sensing a trap, or a predator sensing power. The man's breathing quickened. His muscles twitched. The voices inside him grew restless, their whispers turning to screams. They knew who had arrived. And they were afraid. Down below, Jesus simply stood still. The early light glinted off his robe. He looked up toward the tombs, not in fear, not even in pity, but with a deep, resolute compassion. He wasn't just stepping ashore physically. He was stepping into a battlefield. Not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and darkness. And he would not leave without setting a captive free. A sudden roar shattered the silence. From the tombs above, a figure erupted, barefoot, filthy, and half-naked. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, locked onto Jesus like a predator spotting its prey. He lunged, down the rocky slope with terrifying speed. Arms flailing. Legs bleeding. His screams filled the air, echoing like the shrieks of dying beasts. The disciples instinctively stepped back, some reaching for stones or sticks. But Jesus didn't move. This wasn't just a madman. This was a war-torn soul. A living battlefield of torment. His body bore the marks, gashes, bruises, and scars from battles within himself. His chains, once meant to restrain him, still clung to his wrists in shattered pieces, evidence that no man had been able to control him. He ran straight toward Jesus, dust kicking up behind his feet. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then, he collapsed. Right at Jesus' feet. His knees hit the dirt. His hands clawed at the earth. His mouth opened, not his own voice, but a chilling, guttural growl filled the air. "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The man's body trembled violently. "I beg you, do not torment me." This was no ordinary confrontation. The demons inside him had seized control, but even they could not remain defiant in the presence of absolute authority. The presence of Jesus burned like fire within them. And the man, though enslaved, was drawn to the one person who could save him. The disciples stood in awe. This was not a lesson. This was a revelation. The man lifted his head, dirt smeared across his face, eyes flickering between torment and hope. He was possessed. But even the demons were bowing. Jesus stepped closer, not in fear, but in quiet, holy authority. He looked into the man's eyes, not past him, not at the demons, but into the soul of the man still buried beneath the torment. Then, Jesus spoke, not loudly, but with power. "What is your name?" The man's lips trembled. For a moment, it seemed as if he would speak. But then, something shifted. His posture stiffened. His eyes rolled back. And the voice that came forth was not his own. "Legion," it growled, "for we are many." The air turned colder. The word hung in the space like smoke. Legion, a Roman military term, meaning thousands. Thousands of spirits. Thousands of tormentors. The idea alone chilled the blood. The demons didn't lie, they boasted. They wanted Jesus to know they were powerful, that they were many. That they had made this man their fortress, their domain. But Jesus didn't flinch. Legion continued, voices overlapping within the man's throat, "Do not send us into the abyss. Let us go into the pigs, please." They were powerful, but terrified. The very presence of Jesus forced even demons to beg for mercy. His authority was so absolute that even hell knew its limits when he spoke. And through all of this, Jesus never took his eyes off the man, the true man. Hidden. Bound. Drowning beneath the weight of darkness. Jesus saw him. And he wasn't negotiating with demons. He was reaching for a soul. There, in that sacred moment, a war was being waged. And Jesus was winning it, not with force, but with presence. Soon, the unclean spirits would have no choice. Their time was running out. Jesus gave the word. Not a shout. Not a command barked with anger. Just permission. And then, it happened. A piercing shriek rang from the man's mouth as his body jerked backward, seizing in a violent fit. The ground trembled beneath him. But the scream, oh, the scream, it wasn't human. It was layered with thousands of wailing voices. An exodus of evil. The spirits fled. And instantly, across the field, the peaceful herd of pigs, unclean animals to the Jews, mindless and unaware, suddenly froze. Their eyes turned red with terror. Their bodies convulsed. Then, panic. One after another, hundreds of pigs erupted into chaos. Squealing. Bucking. Running. They stampeded down the slope, their hooves tearing into the earth, foam flying from their mouths. The disciples watched in horror as the entire herd charged headlong into the sea. And then, silence. The water boiled with thrashing bodies for a moment, and then all was still. The lake, once calm, now bore the floating corpses of drowned animals. The people tending the pigs screamed and ran. They didn't understand what they'd seen. They just knew something unnatural had taken place. But back on the hill, the man who had once been possessed lay still. Breathing slowly. His face, peaceful. The torment was over. Gone was the wildness in his eyes. Gone were the tremors, the clenched fists, the constant motion of madness. Now, he sat. Clothed. Still. Calm. The transformation was almost too much to believe. The same man who had once ripped through chains, who had roamed the tombs screaming in agony, now sat at the feet of Jesus like a humble child listening to his teacher. The disciples could hardly take their eyes off him. Even the way he breathed was different. Steady. Rested. Free. He smiled. That alone was a miracle. Jesus looked at him, not as a curiosity, not as a former demoniac, but as a brother, a man fully seen and fully loved. The man reached up and gently touched his own face, as if rediscovering his own humanity. His hands no longer trembled. His body no longer ached with rage. The villagers returned, drawn by the chaos. When they saw the herd destroyed and the man in his right mind, fear gripped their hearts. Not fear of the man anymore, but of Jesus. What kind of power could command legions? What kind of authority could bend spiritual forces to his will? The people whispered. Murmured. Then they pleaded with Jesus. Leave, they said. Please, leave our region. They weren't ready. But the man was. Jesus turned to leave. His mission here was done. The soul he came for was free. The enemy had been defeated. But behind him, footsteps echoed, not rushed, not desperate, but steady. Determined. The man, the once possessed man, followed Jesus to the boat. Let me come with you, he said quietly. His voice still a bit raw, but filled with new life. Please. Let me follow you. It was a sincere request. Not from fear, but from love. From gratitude. from a soul that had finally tasted freedom and wanted nothing more than to walk with the one who had given it. But Jesus stopped, and he shook his head. "Go home," he said softly. "Return to your people, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. Tell them how he has had mercy on you." It was not rejection. It was commission. The man stood in silence for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. His eyes welled with tears, not from sorrow, but from honor. He would obey. He turned, looked at the hills, the tombs, the graves, the dark places that once held him captive. And then he looked back once more at Jesus. And smiled. He had once been a prisoner. Now he was a preacher. He walked slowly at first, unsure how the people would react. The last time they saw him, he was raving like a madman, terrifying children, breaking through chains, and howling through the night. He had been more monster than man. But now, he was different. As he entered the village, people stopped in their tracks. Women gasped. Men stepped back protectively. Children peered from behind doors and corners, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Some whispered his name in disbelief. Others just stared. But he didn't scream. He didn't snarl or groan or twitch. He just smiled. He wore simple, clean clothes given to him by one of the disciples. His hair had been combed, his face gently washed in the lake before Jesus departed. He looked human again. Whole. At peace. He began to speak, not in riddles or madness, but with clarity and fire. "I was possessed," he told them. "They called themselves Legion. They lived inside me. Controlled me. I was not myself. But he, Jesus of Nazareth, he came. He spoke. And the darkness ran." The villagers listened, frozen. They had feared him, avoided him, cursed him. But now, he spoke like a prophet, strong, composed, and full of truth. He walked past the tombs, no longer a prisoner to their memories. He stepped into his old home, where his family wept at the sight of him. Mothers who had shielded their children now wept openly as he blessed them. He didn't return as a man needing healing. He returned as a man carrying a message, that no one is too far gone, and no darkness is too great. He had lived among the dead. Now, he walked among the living, with purpose. It began with whispers. "Did you hear? The man from the tombs, he's back. Not just back, he's healed. No. He's completely different." One by one, people gathered, by the wells, in the markets, under the shade of trees. Conversations stopped and restarted as the story traveled from ear to ear. Some were skeptical. "He must be pretending," they said. "No one recovers from something like that." But others had seen him. Heard him. Watched the way he spoke with peace, hugged his mother, sat with the children, helped carry water to the elderly. "He's not faking," an old woman said. "That man is free." The once feared demoniac had become the talk of 10 towns. People from across the Decapolis, 10 major cities, began to make pilgrimages just to see him. Not because he was a spectacle, but because he was now a sign. A sign that deliverance was real. That Jesus was more than a teacher, he was a liberator. The man did not boast. He pointed always to the one who had healed him. "You think I was strong to survive," he told a curious group gathered near the market. "No. I was helpless. It was Jesus who was strong. It was his mercy, not my might." His story began to echo far and wide, not just of a man who had been possessed, but of the one who had the power to overcome 6,000 demons with a single word. And as he told it again and again, his voice never wavered. His past didn't haunt him, it empowered him. This was no longer a tragedy. It was a testimony. The boat drifted smoothly across the lake once more. The storm was long gone, and the skies above sparkled with the early light of morning. Jesus sat calmly, his gaze fixed ahead. But several disciples couldn't help but turn and look back, toward the distant shoreline where they had left the man behind. They were still processing it all. Peter broke the silence. "We faced a storm, nearly drowned. Then we landed in a graveyard, and that." He trailed off. No word seemed enough to describe the chaos they had witnessed. John nodded. He called himself Legion, and yet, Jesus didn't even flinch. Andrew added, "It wasn't just deliverance. It was a rescue mission." The others murmured in agreement. Jesus had come across the sea for one man. One man abandoned by society. One man tormented by thousands of demons. One man nobody believed could be saved. And yet, Jesus saw value in him. Worth. A purpose waiting to be unleashed. "Why didn't he let him come with us?" asked Thomas, puzzled. "Wouldn't that man have been a powerful witness?" Jesus turned to them, a small knowing smile on his face. "He is," he said. "Exactly where he needs to be." The disciples sat in thoughtful silence. They were beginning to understand, Jesus didn't just come for the multitudes. He came for the forgotten, the hopeless, the possessed, the imprisoned. And when he set someone free, it's not just for their sake, it's so others can believe too. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Soon, the man found himself invited to speak in public places, on rooftops, in synagogues, in marketplaces. People who once feared him now gathered to hear his testimony. And what a story it was. He didn't use complicated theology. He didn't quote long passages or deliver fiery speeches. He simply told what Jesus had done for him. "I was lost," he would say, "so lost that I didn't even remember who I was. My voice was drowned in the voices of many. My mind, shattered. My soul, chained." He would pause, his eyes scanning the faces in front of him, many of them tear-streaked, some skeptical, but all listening. But then he came. Not with armies. Not with swords. But with presence. With power. With mercy. Everywhere he went, lives began to change. People who had secretly struggled with oppression or spiritual torment came to him for help, and he pointed them to the name of Jesus. Marriages were healed. Outcasts returned. Faith grew. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The region once known for its demons began to be known for revival. While the people looked in awe at the transformed man and the crowds that followed him, something greater was happening in the unseen realm. In heaven, there was celebration. The angels rejoiced, not just because demons had been cast out, but because a soul had been restored. Because a man who had been written off by the world had been written into eternity's story by the hand of God. This was the heartbeat of the kingdom: rescue, redemption, renewal. God didn't need grand stages to display his glory. He chose a graveyard. A tormented man. A forgotten region. And in that place, light shattered darkness. From heaven's view, that shoreline wasn't just a plot of land. It was a battlefield won. A prophecy fulfilled. A kingdom expanded. The man's voice, echoing through 10 cities, became part of heaven's own song, a testimony not just of power, but of love. And the Savior? He continued on, calm, steady, and unstoppable. Because his work had only just begun. The air was quiet. The sun cast long shadows across the rocky hills where tombs stood like silent sentinels, haunting reminders of his darkest days. He walked slowly now. Not because of fear, but reverence. These were the places where he had screamed into the night, cut his skin with stones, and begged for relief that never came. But today, he walked upright. He approached the largest tomb, the one he used to sleep inside. The stone entrance was cracked and cold. Inside, dust stirred in the shadows. For a moment, he stared into the place that had once felt like home. "I was dead in here," he whispered. Memories flooded back, chains biting into his wrists, voices clawing at his sanity, the hatred in his own heart as he tore at himself and others. He knelt down and placed his palm on the earth. "But you came for me," he said, lifting his eyes to heaven. "You walked into my graveyard and called me back to life." He stood, stronger now. This wasn't a place of shame anymore. It was sacred ground. Not because it had once been filled with demons, but because it had been the site of his deliverance. Now, when he passed the tombs, he didn't hear screams, he heard silence. And that silence was victory. That night, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the man sat by a small fire. The flames flickered softly, warming his hands. Crickets chirped. The wind rustled through nearby fig trees. He was alone, but not lonely. In the sand beside him, he began to draw. First a cross. Then waves. Then a tiny boat. His memories played in sequence like a film in the stillness. He had come so far. Not in distance, but in identity. He picked up a small stone and etched the word "free" into the dirt beside his drawings. Free. The word echoed in his spirit. He remembered the feel of his chains, the weight, the burn, the sound they made when he'd break them in fits of rage. He remembered the looks of horror on the villagers' faces. The times he tried to drown his own screams in the wind. And then, he remembered Jesus. His eyes. His voice. His calm. His authority. He didn't treat him like a monster. He treated him like a man. "Why me?" he whispered to the fire. But deep down, he knew the answer. Grace doesn't choose the worthy. It chooses the willing. And he had been willing, even in madness, to fall at Jesus' feet. Now, his life was aflame in the darkness. A testimony in a world that doubted miracles. He wasn't perfect. He still wrestled with memories. But he was no longer a prisoner to them. He leaned back, gazing at the stars. The one who had calmed the sea had also calmed his soul. Years passed, but the story never faded. He became more than a miracle. He became a mentor. A messenger. A father to the fatherless. A friend to the fearful. Children would sit at his feet beneath the sycamore tree where he often taught. He told stories, of the sea, the pigs, the storm. But most of all, he told them about the man named Jesus. "Will he come again?" a child once asked. The man smiled, looking toward the hills. "Yes," he said. "And when he does, no tomb, no chain, no demon will stand." Parents listened from nearby, tears in their eyes. They remembered who he had been, and they marveled at who he'd become. One day, a merchant passing through the city said he'd seen Jesus again. He was healing, preaching, raising the dead. The man's heart leapt. Not from jealousy, but from joy. Jesus was still at work. And so was he. He didn't need to follow Jesus on foot. He carried him in every word he spoke, every heart he comforted, every life he touched. The man once called Legion now had a new name in the region, Evangelos, the bringer of good news. His legacy wasn't in books or scrolls, but in transformed hearts and opened eyes. He had been one soul. But his story multiplied hope. Years later, word arrived again, Jesus was returning. This time, there was no fear. No one asking him to leave. Instead, hundreds ran to the shore, faces bright with anticipation. Among them, an older man stood. His hair was grayer, his back a bit more bent. But his eyes shone brighter than ever. He had waited for this day. When Jesus stepped off the boat, the man fell to his knees, not in fear, but in awe. Jesus smiled and helped him to his feet. They didn't need to speak. Their eyes said everything. The crowd gathered, wanting to hear Jesus speak again, but Jesus turned to the man and said, "You tell them." And he did. For the last time, the man told the story. How Jesus had crossed a violent sea. How he walked into a graveyard. how he faced a legion, and how he set one man free, so that thousands more could believe. The story of the demoniac didn't end at the shoreline. It didn't stop with his healing. It echoed, generation after generation. Fathers told their sons. Mothers told their daughters. Travelers carried it across borders. Merchants whispered it in distant lands. A man once filled with darkness had become a vessel of light. Not because he was strong, but because he was found. And Jesus? He didn't just heal the sick or calm seas. He rescued the forgotten. He restored the wrecked. He pursued the one no one else would chase. He came to the tombs, for one man. And because of that one, 10 cities saw the light. Even today, the story is told. Of the man called Legion. Of the demons who begged for mercy. Of the pigs who plunged into the sea. And of the Savior who proved that no soul is too lost, no heart too broken, no grave too deep. He's still coming for the broken. Still crossing storms for the tormented. Still calling us out of tombs. Because when Jesus steps ashore, darkness has to flee. And freedom begins.
Have you ever felt trapped, forgotten, beyond saving? Just like the man in the tombs, your story isn't over. Jesus still crosses storms to reach the broken. And if he came for one, he'll come for you. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Comment below. Jesus found me too. Or, he still sets the captives free. Your testimony could awaken hope in someone else. Share this video with someone who feels lost in the dark. It might be the miracle they've been waiting for. Like if you believe in the power of redemption. Subscribe for more true Bible stories told with cinematic impact. And hit the bell icon, so you never miss a moment that could change your life.